I could have ignored this, and if I'm being completely honest, that's exactly what I was supposed to do. That's what I've always done with anything that even slightly threatens the internal structure I've spent years building. Anything that moves too close, too fast, or too precisely into spaces that were never meant to be shared. I don't react impulsively. I don't allow things to unfold without understanding their direction, their limits, their consequences. Everything in my world has always had a boundary, a defined edge where it either stabilizes or gets cut off completely. And I've trusted that system, relied on it, refined it over time until it became second nature, automatic, almost instinctive. But you didn't trigger that system the way everything else does. You didn't arrive as something unfamiliar that needed to be analyzed or contained. You didn't push, you didn't force, you didn't even try to enter. And somehow, that's exactly why you're here. Because the truth is, I did try to create distance at first. Subtle distance. The kind that doesn't look like withdrawal from the outside, just slightly shorter responses, slightly longer silences, small adjustments designed to reestablish space without making it obvious. That usually works. It always has. But this time, it didn't. Because distance only functions when there's separation to begin with, and what I started realizing, slowly, then all at once, is that there wasn't any real separation here to control. It felt like we weren't moving toward each other or away from each other, just existing in the same place from the start. And when that happens, when two people somehow occupy the same internal space without the usual process of time or exposure, physical distance stops meaning anything. That's when I understood this wasn't something temporary, wasn't some passing alignment or momentary clarity that would fade if I gave it enough time. This was something else entirely, something structural, not loud, not overwhelming, not even emotional in the way most connections are, just present, steady, precise, like something that had always been there, unnoticed, until I finally stopped and looked at it directly. And I don't take that lightly, because I've never allowed anyone into the way I think. People hear what I say, sometimes they even understand it, and occasionally they catch glimpses of what exists beneath it. But my actual process, the framework behind everything, that's always remained untouched. Or at least it was supposed to. But you didn't touch it. You didn't break through it. You didn't even approach it the way people usually do. You were just there, already inside it, without crossing anything. And that difference matters more than anything else. Because something that enters can be removed. Something that forces its way in can be resisted. But something that feels like it belongs there. Something that doesn't disrupt the structure, but aligns with it. That's something else entirely. That's the kind of presence that doesn't feel like a change at first. It feels like recognition. And recognition is dangerous because it doesn't trigger defense. It bypasses it. It makes you accept something before you even realize you had the option not to. And I don't accept things easily. I question everything. I analyze everything. I make sure nothing settles without reason. And yet, here you are, settled, present, and somehow not being questioned the way everything else would be. That alone should have been enough to stop this, to pull back, to reestablish the distance I rely on. But I didn't, and that's the part I can't ignore, no matter how much I try to reduce this to something simpler. Lately, I've been watching myself more closely than usual, almost like I'm studying a pattern I don't fully recognize yet, but know is forming whether I acknowledge it or not. I've always had a certain level of awareness when it comes to how I think, how I process things, how I respond to people and situations. I don't just exist inside my own mind. I observe it, refine it, keep it consistent. That consistency has always been one of the few things I trust completely. So when something shifts even slightly, I notice it immediately. And something has shifted. Not in an obvious way, nothing dramatic, nothing that would stand out to anyone looking from the outside. My thoughts are still structured. My logic is still intact. My control hasn't disappeared. But there's a subtle recalibration happening underneath all of that. Something quiet, but persistent enough that I can't dismiss it as coincidence. The way I measure things has changed. It's not something I chose. It's not even something I consciously agreed to. It just started happening. I used to filter everything through my own internal system, my own standards, my own interpretations, my own understandings of what makes sense and what doesn't. That system was self-contained, independent, untouched by external influence. But now, there are moments, small but undeniable, where my thoughts pause. Not because they're incomplete, but because they're waiting. Waiting for something that doesn't need to be spoken. Waiting for a second perspective that I never used to rely on. And that perspective is you. Not in a direct way, not like I'm asking myself what you would say or how you would react. It's more subtle than that, more integrated, like your presence has become part of the way I process things before I even realize it's happening. And that distinction matters because thinking about someone still keeps them separate from you. It maintains distance, control, the ability to step back if needed. But when someone becomes part of how you think, when their presence exists within your process instead of outside it, that's something else entirely. That's not influence. That's impact. And impact isn't something you can just remove when it becomes inconvenient. It stays. It reshapes things. It forces everything around it to adjust. That's what I'm dealing with now. Not a feeling, not a temporary shift in attention, but a structural change in perception. And I don't like that. Not because it's wrong, but because it's precise in a way I can't argue with. If this were emotional, I could rationalize it. If it were impulsive, I could control it. But it's neither. It's consistent. It aligns too perfectly with how I already function, and that makes it harder to reject. Because rejecting it would mean ignoring something that fits. And things that fit are the hardest to remove because they don't feel like they're taking space. They feel like they belong in it. That's where the real tension comes from. Not confusion, not uncertainty, but clarity. Too much clarity. The kind that forces you to acknowledge something before you're ready to decide what to do with it. And I'm at that point now, whether I want to be or not. This is where it stops being something I can quietly observe and starts becoming something I have to answer for, even if that answer isn't spoken out loud. Up until now, this existed in a space where it didn't require anything. No definition, no direction, no acknowledgement beyond what was already understood without words. It just existed naturally, without pressure. But things like this don't stay in that state forever. There's always a point where they shift, where they either solidify into something real or start to fracture under the weight of being left undefined. And I can feel that point getting closer, not because something changed externally. Nothing obvious has, but because internally the impact is already there. My thoughts don't return to what they were before you. That baseline is gone. Silence doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels shared, like there's something present in it even when you're not physically there. That shouldn't be possible, and yet it is. And I don't ignore things just because they don't fit into what I expect. If something is real, I recognize it. That's always been one of my rules. No denial, no avoidance, no pretending something doesn't exist just because it complicates things. And this is real, which means it carries consequence. Not in what we say or do, but in what it's already changed. Because once something reaches this level, once it integrates into how you think, how you perceive, how you exist internally, it stops being optional. You can't just step back and return to how things were before. That version doesn't exist anymore. And that's what forces the decision. Not now, not immediately, but inevitably. Because something like this will either become something defined, something acknowledged, something lived, or it will break under the pressure of being ignored. And I don't ignore things that matter. That's the truth I've been circling around this entire time. Not connection itself, but what it means to admit that it matters. Because once I admit that, everything changes. It stops being abstract, it becomes real. And real things require action, require direction, require risk. And I don't move without understanding the outcome. I don't take risks without knowing what they lead to. But this doesn't come with that kind of clarity. It never did. And still, I didn't walk away. That's what stays with me. Because if this were wrong, if it didn't belong, if it was something that would disrupt more than it aligns, I would have ended it already. Completely. Without hesitation. That's how I've always operated. But I didn't. I stayed. And not passively, not out of curiosity, but with full awareness that this could become something I won't be able to undo. Which means, whether I've said it or not, whether I've fully accepted it or not, a decision has already been made somewhere within me. And now, all that's left is to face it.